One of the most influential theologians of the 20th century was named A.W. Tozer, and he once said this, that what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. I think he was onto something. What he's saying is what we believe about God matters for our life. Because what we believe is going to influence our priorities are going to influence our decisions, and those decisions are going to shape the landscape of our lives. C.S. Lewis came along and added to that conversation, and he said, it's not just about what we think of God that's most important. What's actually most important is what God thinks of us. That's even more important than what we think about him. And so I guess the bigger question is, well, how do we know what God thinks about us? How do we know God at all? The scriptures actually talk to us about this and then tells us that we should look to Jesus, because Jesus was described as the radiance of God's glory. He was described as the exact representation of God's being. And so if we want to know what God is like, all we have to do is look to who Jesus is and what he says about himself and what that means for us. And so today, I want to take a moment to take you to John chapter 6. Jesus, at this point, had been teaching this massive crowd. Over 5,000 people were in attendance, and now they're hungry. And Jesus' disciples, they don't know what to do. They're nervous. They have no food for all these people. And they've basically been hosting this all-day teaching conference with Jesus, and there's no meal at the end. And so Jesus sends his disciples to find food. And one of the disciples, all they could do was find a kid who had a sack lunch, 5 loaves of bread, a couple of fish. Jesus, this is all we have. And Jesus took all they had and blesses it and breaks it and begins to hand it out. And the disciples gave out food. They fed over 5,000 people. And this moment that looked like scarcity, oh, we don't have enough, God provided abundantly more than enough. And then after that miracle happens, Jesus uses this as an opportunity to describe who he is. This is where we need to pay attention. He says in John 6:35, he makes this declaration. He says, I am the bread of life, and whoever comes to me will never go hungry. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Jesus is wanting us to know that he did not step out of heaven 2,000 years ago just to give us a new religion. He didn't come all this way and move into our neighborhood just to bring a better set of beliefs. He didn't come just to be a great example for us. He didn't just come to point the finger and show us how guilty we are. He didn't even come so that we could have just a better afterlife. Jesus says he has come to bring us life. Life. This news has changed my life. I don't know about you, but for so many years, when I thought about Jesus, I thought about him as my way to heaven, that he was somehow like my get out of hell for free card, that he is great for my afterlife, but not so much for this life. But after reading the scriptures for myself years ago, I learned, wow, Jesus didn't just come for my afterlife. He came to bring me life right here, right now, and for all eternity. That is good news. Jesus is offering you life to the full. And yet, if we were honest, there are a lot of us settling for something way less. God, he actually gave me an image of this in a practical way. Years and years ago, our family, when our kids were much younger, we went for a walk. And we were in the middle of the street. And you know those sewer drains that were on the side of the street? Well, out of nowhere, this cat pops out of the sewer, like it was waiting for us. And he hissed at us. And it was a frightening moment. Our daughter at the time was just shocked. And to be honest, I was a bit startled. This thing was really scary looking. It'd seen its better days. It was supposed to be a white cat, but it was dirty and it was skinny. You could tell that this cat really didn't have a home. And to be honest, it doesn't help that I don't like cats. Dogs go to heaven. I don't know where cats end up. Just kidding to all the cat lovers. But in this moment, we all lock eyes. The cat looks at us, stops in its tracks. We look at the cat, and my daughter asks the question, "Daddy, what's that?" And I said, "Baby, that's a sewer cat." And I thought that would be the end of the conversation, but it was actually only the beginning. And now, at this point, she was at the age where she learned to ask the why question. And this was a new thing for our family. But Daddy, why does the cat live in the sewer? And I had to make something up on the fly. Well, maybe because that cat made some bad decisions in high school, hung out with the wrong crowd, didn't listen to mommy or daddy. That's why it ended up in the sewer. She says, "Well, Dad, do you think that cat has any cat friends down there?" I said, "I'm sure it's got a bunch of friends who made bad decisions as well, living in the sewer." And so desperately in need to change the subject, I'm like, "Hey, Bellamy, how about you look at the clouds in the sky? Aren't those amazing?" But she stops dead in her tracks and she looks at me and she says, "Daddy, wait a second. Does this cat have a mommy or daddy?" And I said, I'm not sure, baby. Which, by the way, I should have just lied. I should have absolutely said, "Of course, he's got a mommy and daddy. It's great." She looks at me, tears welling up in her eyes, and she says, "Daddy, that cat's all alone? That cat doesn't have a family? That cat doesn't have a mommy or daddy?" And for the first time in my life, I saw my daughter's heart break over this gross sewer cat. Somehow captured her heart. And so I'm a dad and I try to fix stuff. Okay, well, hey, honey, it's okay. It's going to be okay. How about we just go over there and pet it? And so we approach the cat and that sewer cat darts off. We thought to never see him again. And I thought to myself, great, that's the end of the story. We never have to see this thing ever again. But my daughter was relentless. She looked at me and said, "Hey, can we get this cat some food and leave it by the sewer?" And so we started leaving cat food by the sewer every night and some milk. We don't know what cats eat, but we've left it there by the sewer, and we'd wake up the next day and it was gone. Something was eating it. We didn't know what it was. And we kept doing it night after night after night. And then one night I come home after work and guess who's waiting for me in our driveway? Yeah, it was the cat. And it scared me to death. He came up to me though, and this time he wasn't hissing at me, he was purring. And he rubbed up against my leg. And just as my daughter heard me come home, she ran out the door. She saw the cat purring on my leg and she was thrilled. She says, "Dad, we've got a cat." And I'm like, no, we don't. We do not have a cat. Well, needless to say, our family had a cat. We named him Snowball. And he hung out every night on our front porch where we fed him and we gave him everything that he needed. This cat started to live the dream. I tell you that story because here's what God taught me through this cat, Snowball, is that all of his miserable existence, Snowball only knew the sewers, where he had to scrounge around for food, where he was just merely surviving. That cat, when we first met, it was unhealthy. It was in bad shape. It was dirty. It was gross. But now that cat was living the dream. It had warm blankets, it had warm milk, it had fancy feast. It had the love of a whole family. That cat was living a life. Every day, that cat taught me this powerful reality. There are so many of us, we think we are living. And in all reality, a lot of us have made our home in the sewers. C.S. Lewis, he's one of my favorite authors. He writes in his book, The Weight of Glory, that when we try to find life in things other than Jesus. It's like we are settling for mud pies in the slums when God is offering us a holiday at the sea. Here's the amazing news, is that Jesus came to rip us from the sewers we've been living in to bring us to life. John 11:25, Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. John 10:10, Jesus says, I have come so that you can have life and life to the full. Jesus says in John 14:6 that I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. The promise of God, the good news, is that you don't have to settle for the sewers anymore. You don't have to look for satisfaction in the things of the world, that you can have life in God. For you actually don't know what life is until you know him. One of the stories in the scriptures that I most resonate with is the life of Solomon. Here's a guy who went on the ultimate search for satisfaction, and he wrote a book about it called Ecclesiastes. This book is his journal about how he tested out everything this world has to offer. He actually experienced it. And it's the morning after. And what he is basically saying is, this can't be all there is. In Ecclesiastes 2, Solomon, he goes to show us how he ran as hard as he could after the pleasures of this world. And he's saying, when you run after the world, you think you're living, but you really aren't. And so I want you to hear the testimony of Solomon. Let's dig into Ecclesiastes 2, verses 1-3. He starts the experiment and he says, I said to myself, come now, I'll test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Verse 2, laughter, I said, is madness. And what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives. And so Solomon starts out here and he says, I've set it in my heart that I'm going to test pleasure out for all it's worth. He doesn't just sort of test it out. No, he's going to take pleasure to its very end. He's not going to leave one stone unturned when it comes to pleasure. He's committing his life to the pursuit of pleasure. He says, I'm going all out. I'm going to use all my resources, all my time, all my energy, all my creativity to consume as much pleasure as I possibly can, trying to answer the question, can pleasures of the world satisfy me? And so Solomon is systematically partying his way through life. People say live for the weekend. Solomon's like, I'm going to make my life the weekend. And so he throws party after party. He's rolling out barrels of wine. He's got the best entertainment, best dancers, best music, 7 days a week, all day, every day. He's committed his life to pleasure. He is basically Gatsby. And he says in verse 2, it's madness. Eventually, he got tired of waking up on some random couch with a new drawing on his face. And so he moves on from there. He says, I'm gonna make my life about something else. And he moves on. Look at what he does next, starting in verse 4 through verse 9. He says, I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delight of a man's heart. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all of this, my wisdom stayed with me. So he's like, all right, so the party lifestyle doesn't have lasting power. So what does he do? He turns to achievement. So he begins to build his house. Now, to give you an idea of the kind of house we're talking about here, the temple took 7 years to build. It was ornate with gold and precious stones. It took 7 years. One of the ancient wonders of the world. Solomon's house, in comparison, took 14 years to build. He's saying, I cannot be outdone. Cute. You built a garden, check out my forest. You've got a nanny, check out the thousands of servants that I have at my beck and call. You're a CEO, that's cute. I own the Middle East. You've got a trophy wife, Great. I've got 700 of them and 300 other mistresses on the side. He's trying to paint a picture that he cannot be outdone. Anything he ever wanted, he got it. He built it. He saw it. He did it. He achieved it. He experienced it. Just to be clear, he says in verse 10, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. And this might make some of us feel uncomfortable, but he says, my heart took delight in all my labor. And this was the reward for all my toil. So what he's telling us here, he's letting us in on the reality of pleasure. He says, I denied myself nothing. And you know what? It was fun. This is sort of an awkward moment. Why is this in the Bible? What he's saying is his pursuit of pleasure and achievement was fun, and his pursuit of sin was fun. He says, my heart delighted in it. Christians will often lie and say that sin isn't fun, and that those sorts of pursuits aren't fun. But the reality is, it can be fun. Otherwise, what would temptation be? Think about it. If sin wasn't fun, if those pursuits weren't fun, you would do it one time and you never do it again. But that's not what happens, is it? We go back. Why? Because sin can sometimes be fun. These pursuits can sometimes be fun. I was just thinking about it earlier today. The story of Adam and Eve in the garden. There's that serpent and he tempts them in the garden. And he's like, hey, you should try this fruit. I mean, did God really say this is something you can't eat from? God didn't really say that. Come on, give it a shot. And then it says in Genesis 3:6, when the woman saw the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her and he ate it. I imagine that when they bit the fruit, they enjoyed it. I imagine she enjoyed it so much, in fact, that she told Adam that he needs to take a bite too. It was so good. It's everything you think you want. And sometimes you want to say, no, it's not. It's a lie to people, right? And say, oh, that's not what it really is. It's not fun. It's not pleasurable. But it is. This is what makes temptation hard. Sin can feel good sometimes, but there's another reality that the world doesn't want you to hear, that while it may be fun, it will not last. This is what the world will not tell you, that sin and those pursuits lack staying power. Those things are temporary, it's fleeting, and you'll never actually get enough. It promises life, but delivers the sewer. This is the nature of sin. It will taste fun on the outset, but as I've heard it said so many times, sin will take you farther than you want to go, keep you longer than you want to stay, and cost you more than you're willing to pay. This is the nature of sin. It promises life, but leaves you in the sewers. It leads us to the next verse, and check out what Solomon says in verse 11. He says, yet when I surveyed, that word surveyed, it literally means face to face. When I looked at it for what it was, look something right in the eye. Solomon's facing reality, looking at life for what it really is. He says, when I looked at it, all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, the women, the entertainment, the money, the power, the worldly achievement, the popularity, everything was meaningless. It was all a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. It was empty. And so he then concludes, for all these things, after going through all of this, verse 17, he says, so I hated life because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me, all of it meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Solomon is saying, I went after it with everything I got. It left me emptier than when I began. And it's the morning after, none of it can satisfy. Solomon then concludes, verse 25, for without him, who can eat or find enjoyment. He's come to the conclusion, I chased everything this world could offer, and it's a chasing after the wind. Only in God can we have life to the full. Jesus doesn't just promise a great afterlife. He actually promises life. He is the spring of living water. He is the bread of life. He's saying, guys, all the life that you can have it in me. All the hope you need, all the love you need, all the peace you need, everything that you've been looking for, you can find it in Jesus, and he will not disappoint. Now, you might be listening to this saying, well, I feel pretty alive right now. I'm breathing, I'm living, I've got house and got cars. People like me, people notice me, my life is pretty good, it's pretty comfortable. But without God, there is no life. What we have without God is existence. What we have without God is the sewers. And Jesus came to rip us from that and bring us into life. And the way you move from death and from the sewers and into life is to give your life to Jesus. In Ephesians chapter 2, verses 4 and 5, it says, God, who is rich in mercy, he made us alive with Christ, that even though we were dead in transgressions, it is by grace that you have been saved. That the moment I gave my life to Jesus, I found life. He changed me from the inside out. Never been the same. For years, especially in college, I lived out Solomon's search. I went after everything the world could offer to find satisfaction. My college friends, they knew the old me. And several years ago, we got to meet up again. All the college friends got together. We were at a dinner. And this friend who was at college with me the whole time, he's a journalist. He kept sort of looking at me strange the whole night. He was interested in how I was acting and what I was talking about and what I was passionate about. It's been years since we had seen each other. And he said, Daniel, I want you to know, I get into these conversations all the time with other journalists, friends, and first dates and people that I talk with. And they'll ask me, do I believe in God? And I asked him, I said, well, what do you tell him? And he said, here's what I tell them. You know how I believe there's a God? Because there's a guy named Daniel Butson. Because if you knew that Daniel in college and you could see his life today, he's like a completely new person. He said, man, it's like you're alive. And I looked at him and I said, I finally am. And he says, if God can change you, he's got to be real. Now, I don't know if I should take that as a compliment or as a dig. I don't know. But I tell you what, that the moment you give your life to God is the moment God gives you life. For so long, my life was existence. It was gray. And I thought I was living the dream, but I was in the sewers. You don't have to live in the sewers any longer. You don't have to look in the sewers for satisfaction any longer. He's inviting you to come. All of you who are thirsty, all of you who are hungry for satisfaction, all of you who are weary, come to Jesus, and he says you'll find life. You'll find what you're looking for. That's my prayer for you. Jesus, thank you for coming for us 2,000 years ago. Not just for a better afterlife, but to give us life right here, right now, for all eternity. And there's some of us who have settled for the sewers. We've been looking for satisfaction in all the wrong places. And we've come up short every time. It's because we were designed for more. We were designed for you. And if there's any here today that are looking for real satisfaction, real peace, real joy, real love, real hope, looking for life, I pray that they would find it in you, Jesus. You lived a life that we couldn't live. You died on a cross that we deserved. You raised from a grave, victorious over sin, death, hell, and the grave, so that we could have life. And if that's you today, I just want to invite you to trust in Jesus. The Bible says all who call upon the name of the Lord will be saved. So today, call on his name. Say, Lord, today my life is yours. I hand it to you. Forgive me of my sin. I turn from looking for satisfaction in all the wrong places. Today, I'm choosing to follow you. Lead me into life. Lord, thank you that you will. Pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.